Boom, Ever Onward Tribe. I was reflecting with a buddy of mine on our time in the battlefield. This is a teammate of mine that we were in Iraq together. And one of the true unsung peer groups or stories from those wars, both in Iraq and Afghanistan, I'm assuming it's always been the case when someone is fighting in a foreign land, are our interpreters. So it's the guys that are locals or speak the language of the local, are usually from that region of the world, and will use to communicate, whether it be with, host nation forces that we're working with, or if we, capture a bad guy for interrogations or the purpose of understanding what's happening on the battlefield. I had in 2006 on one of my most combat heavy deployments, very, very famous deployment with, several of our teammates earning the Medal of Honor, unbelievable combat action and decorations that came out of that window of time. But one of my interpreters we called Sam. Sam was not his real name. He was an interesting guy. He was a Christian from southern Lebanon. He'd fought with the Israelis for many years. I think he fought with their Secret Service and some of their high-end assault teams. I mean, he had several bullet holes in him by the time he got to me. And he was just one of the all-time fantastic human beings. He was just magic on the battlefield. His ability to understand the situation and give us tremendous guidance, let alone communicate what needed to be communicated, was otherworldly. I'd never had an interpreter that ever approached him. If you like poetry, there's a poem, I think it's called Gunga Din, but it's one of the all-time, it's Kipling, and it's one of the all-time, and it talks about the British military, I think, with their campaigns in Africa, and Gunga Din's this kind of like Sherpa or handler, and he ends up being the kind of the best man on the field in the harshest conditions. Sam reminded me of Gunga Din. He was my Gunga Din. So we had amazing time on the battlefield, but one that I'll never forget is we were leaving a very hostile area. We'd actually just gotten in a gunfight. We're on a daylight patrol, so we're moving through a very violent, dangerous part of Iraq, and we're going back to a building, a big house that we were occupying amongst others. We were actually running security operations for a Marine and Navy construction unit that was building what's called a combat outpost, a place where we could have kind of a foothold in bad guy country. But we had some big houses. We had snipers up there to protect, so the guys running the dozers and the big cats building this thing aren't getting shot at the whole time. And one of the reasons we did that is we'd launch a patrol and we'd go out to try and draw the enemy fire and their attention away from the construction location. So we'd gotten in a gunfight, all had gone well. We're coming back to this house, and we would rarely go out one route and come back the same way. That's an easy way to set yourself up for an ambush. So we're coming back a different direction, and we somehow hadn't seen on our imagery or our maps that there were a bunch of ponds that we were going to walk, man-made, but a bunch of ponds that we're going to walk by to get back to this house. And as we're walking past, we're in a combat patrol, but I see a middle-aged kind of Iraqi that was on his knees on next to this pond, but he was fishing. He was fishing with a hand line to catch, I imagine, bottom feeders, carp, and things like that. If you've read my first book, Damn Few, you'll see a picture of me holding up this fish. But I see this, I stop the patrol, I grab Sam. I was like, hey, you got to come over with me to talk to this guy. I was like, hey, I'm a fisherman. Fishermen and outdoorsmen are the biggest group of liars that ever walked the earth. Everybody's competing for the biggest fish, the biggest bull, the biggest, animal you can take. And fish stories only get bigger. You caught a 12-incher, then it becomes, by the time you're done telling that story, 10 years later, you caught a 37-inch trout, right? So that's the way those stories work. But it occurred to me that if I was in full body armor in the combat zone, having just finished a combat engagement, if I catch a fish right now, I win for life. Every campfire mat, I win the fish story. So we communicate with this guy. Sure enough, he gives it to me, and dang if I don't catch one of these bottom feeders. So you'll see me with combat gear on in that picture, holding up this fish. Not 30 seconds after that I caught that fish, a bunch of mortar rounds came in. Somebody had seen our location, started engaging us. We bound our way out of there, got out of it. Everybody was safe. Unbeknownst to me, Sam had grabbed the basket of fish because that guy took off that he had caught, and we were on our way. So later that night, we get back to the house. Sam was one of the few interpreters that we didn't have to really care for and take care of. He could go do whatever he wanted to do. He was kind of one of the team. And I remember I'm writing up an after action reporter up on the roof, kind of waiting to, get into the, late part of the night where I could get a couple hours sleep. And somebody says, "Hey, has anybody seen Sam?" I'm like, "What are you talking about? Has anybody seen Sam?" They're like, "I haven't seen him. He's not downstairs. He's not upstairs. I don't know what's going on." It's a really rough thing to have that happen. You don't want to lose somebody on the battlefield, but it's also one of those strange ones where you sort of had a sense that if Sam was missing, it wasn't on accident. So I said, "Hey, everybody keep your eyes peeled. Let's make sure he's not, if he left, he doesn't come back. We shoot him coming into our location, and I know it's going to work out." Just something about it, I knew he'd be okay. The next morning, I wake up after a couple of hours of sleep, and I smell something from downstairs that I cannot even wrap my head around how delicious and wonderful the smells were. You live on a battlefield like that, and you're eating MREs and Mountain House meals and power bars. You don't get a lot of good chow when you're out there. Sam, unbeknownst to us, had taken those 8-10 fish, snuck out of the house into the local village, had somehow found a pot, a pan, a bunch of oil, and a bunch of potatoes. And by the time we woke up, he had basically cooked and fried fish and chips. He'd even figured out some sauce to create so we could dip the fish in it. Now, based on those fields, I have no idea if I'm guaranteed to have some disease in the future or cancer from eating that fish. I have never tasted anything better in my life. Recently, a buddy of mine was talking to me about, my best meals. We were at a really, really fine dining restaurant. He said, "What's the best meal you've ever had?" And I think he thought for sure it'd be at, one of the great restaurants in the world, some 3-star Michelin chef that's known the world over. And I said, when I think about it, the best meals I've ever had in my life were on a paper plate or no paper at all. It was when I was hungry. It was when I was beat down. It was when I was a spot where there wasn't creature comforts and the things you get to enjoy. And that fish and chips, if I had to rate the best meal I've ever had, that would be high, high on the list. Go put yourself in tough situations so when you actually go to eat, the food is something you need. Trust me, it'll taste better. Ever onward.